Chapter 6. Makeup. Mama was preparing for the evening meal when Jinshi said, "Do you know much about makeup?" The question came completely out of the blue. What in the world is he asking about that for, Mama thought, making no effort to hide her confusion. For the first time in a while, she found herself looking at him as if she were studying a caterpillar, not that she had really meant to. Jinshi had just come back from work, Sweden was helping him change clothes, and this was what he wanted to know. It was true that growing up in the pleasure district, one learned the basics of doing makeup by osmosis, and sometimes Mama concocted cosmetics as well as medicine. She couldn't deny she had a fair amount of knowledge about the subject. "Do you wish to give some to someone as a gift?" "You misunderstand. It's for me." That struck Mama dumb. Her eyes became bottomless black pits, vacant and empty. She no longer even looked like she was gazing at a dead bug or a puddle of mud. "What are you imagining?" Jinshi snapped. Well, what else would she be imagining? Jinshi in makeup. He was the one who'd brought it up. He doesn't need any damn makeup, Mama thought. He already had the beauty of some denizen of the heavenly realm. A touch of crimson around the eyes, a dab of rouge on the lips, and a flower mark upon his brow would be enough to bring the nation to its knees. History was full of pointless wars, and more than a few of them had been caused by a beautiful woman too close to the seat of power. And this man, he had the potential to transcend gender entirely. "Do you want to destroy this country?" Mamo asked flatly. "What in the world gave you that idea?" Jinshi exclaimed, pulling his outer jacket on and sitting in a chair. Mamo served him congee from a clay pot. It was made with good, salty abalone, and the bite she took to test it for poison was delicious. She knew that when Jinshi was finished, Sweden would split the leftovers with her, so she wished he would hurry up and eat it before it all went cold. "How do you make that stuff you use?" Jinshi asked, indicating her nose. Oh, my freckles, Mama thought, and then it came to her. His beauty was already so overwhelming that he needed nothing to enhance it, but perhaps something to blunt it. "I dissolve dry clay in oil, sir. If I want the product to be especially dark, I mix in charcoal or red lip pigment." And can you do that on short notice?" Mama produced a clamshell from the folds of her robe. Inside was tight-packed clay. "This is all I have on me right now, but give me a night's time and I can easily make more." Jinshi took the clamshell, scooped up some of the contents with his finger, and rubbed it on the back of his hand. It was a bit too dark, Mama thought, for his almost porcelain skin. She would have to thin the mixture out. "Will you yourself be using it, sir?" Jinshi chuckled softly. It wasn't a real answer, but Mama figured she could take it as a yes. "If you know any medicine that can change a man's face, I would love to hear about it," he said lightly. He was joking, but Mama replied, "Such things exist, but you would never be able to change back. Lacquer, for instance, would do the job in a hurry." "I suppose so," Jinshi said with a strained smile. He wouldn't want that, and neither would anyone else around her. Mama could easily picture herself torn to pieces and fed to the beasts if she dared to do such a thing. "There are certain techniques, sir, which might achieve the same effect," she said. "If you please, then." Jinshi smiled as if this was what he had been waiting for, and finally set about eating his congee. He was enjoying some perfectly cooked chicken meat so much that Mama despaired of getting any leftovers. When Sweden took the tray away, there was only a single bite left on it. "I want you to make me someone else entirely," Jinshi said. I wonder what he's planning, Mama thought, but she valued her life more than to ask. Besides, she had nothing to gain by knowing. She need only do as she was told. "Very well," she said, and then she watched Jinshi continue his dinner, silently urging him to hurry up. That abalone congee looked so good. The next day, Mama set out a cloth with everything she needed, a batch of her makeup thinned down, and a few other items she thought would help. She arrived earlier than usual to find the lights already lit in Jinshi's personal rooms. The master of the place had finished his bath and was reclining on a couch while Sweden dried his hair. Only a noble would know or expect such luxury. His outfit was plainer than usual, but his every movement betrayed his aristocratic background. "Good morning," Mama said, looking as if she didn't think it was very good at all. "Morning," Jinshi replied. For his part sounded entirely pleased. He seemed like he might start humming at any moment. "Something the matter? It seems early for such stormy looks." "Not at all, sir. I was merely contemplating the fact that you'll spend yet another day being perfectly beautiful." "What's this? Some new way to snipe at me?" Perhaps it sounded like it, but it was only the truth. Jinshi's hair caught the light as it fell. The way it glittered, Mama thought it could have been turned into quite a fine textile. "Do you feel like doing your job today?" he said. "I do, sir. But are you quite certain you wish to become someone else entirely?" "Yes, I said so last night." "Then if you'll pardon me." Mama strode up beside Jinchi, grabbed the sleeves of his outfit, and shoved them against her face. "Goodness gracious," Sweden said. She left off combing Jinchi's hair and hustled out of the room, taking Gashwin with her as he tried to come in. They didn't go far, though, certainly not so far that they couldn't quietly watch what was happening. What do you think you're doing?" Jinchi's voice threatened to crack. When she had been given a task, Mama only felt right when she had performed it to the utmost. She had assembled a panoply of tools to help her make Jinchi unrecognizable. "He has no idea, does he?" Mama thought. "No commoner would wear such fine perfume," she said. The outfit Jinchi had chosen was that of a townsman, or perhaps a lesser government official, not the kind of person who would have any contact or connection with ships bringing exotic, expensive, fragrant woods from beyond the sea. Mama's sense of smell was especially sharp, honed in the service of distinguishing medicinal from poisonous herbs. She had detected Jinchi's perfume the moment she entered the room, and that was what had caused her ill humor. Sweden had probably perfumed the outfit, trying to be helpful, but quite frankly, she'd only made things worse. "Do you know how to discern the various types of customers at a brothel?" "I don't. Perhaps by their body type or their clothing?" "Those are possibilities, but there's another way. The smell." Overweight patrons who gave off a sweet odor were sick, but most likely rich. Those who wore several perfumes at once, creating a noxious miasma, frequented the common prostitutes and most likely had a sexual disease, while a young person who reeked like an animal indicated an unsanitary failure to take baths. The Verdigris house was not in the habit of accepting first-time customers without introductions, but every once in a while one would prevail upon the old madam and gain entrance. That such people almost always became excellent regulars showed that the old woman knew how to judge her clientele. "Anyway, the first thing we need is a different outfit, and something else." Mama went over to the bathtub and got a bucket of still warm water, which she brought over to Jinchi. Sweden and Gauchwin watched her anxiously. Since he was there, Mama sent Gauchwin on an errand. They were going to need clothing other than what had been prepared. Now she took a small leather pouch from her cloth bag. She dipped her fingers in it, and they emerged dripping with viscous oil, which she dissolved in the bucket of water. "One thing commoners do not do is take baths every day," she informed him. She wet her hand in the bucket, then ran it through Jinchi's hair. With a few passes of Mama's hand, his lustrous locks began to lose their shine. She thought she was being careful, but she wasn't as experienced at this as Sweden was, which must have been why Jinchi seemed so antsy. Have to be careful not to pull his hair, Mama thought, growing a little nervous herself. It was all too easy to forget, but this august personage could cause a permanent rift between her head and her shoulders if he was too displeased. When the shining silk strands that had once adorned Jinchi's head had become dull hemp, Mama tied his hair back. She didn't use a proper hair tie so much as a scrap of cloth. For his new persona, anything would do so long as it served its purpose. By the time Mama had put the bucket away and washed her hands, Gauchwin was back with exactly what she'd requested. Now that was good help. "Are you quite sure about this?" Gauchwin asked, looking distinctly uneasy. Beside him, Sweden was making no attempt to hide her repugnance. No doubt it was hard for such a long-serving lady-in-waiting to believe what she was seeing. Gauchwin had procured a largish and very well-used commoner's outfit. It had at least been washed, but the cloth was thinning in places, and the original owner's musk still clung to it. Mama put the outfit to her nose and said, "I might have preferred something even a little stinkier." Now Sweden truly looked astonished, her hands on her cheeks. She seemed about to speak up, but Gauchwin silenced her with a motion of his hand. Still, he couldn't conceal the furrow in his own brow. Mau felt bad for Sweden, but she still had plenty to do that would test the woman's spirits. "Master Jinchi, please undress." Yes, certainly," Jinchi said, though he didn't sound very certain. Mau paid his reluctance no mind, but bustled around the room looking for something that would serve her purpose. She found several handkerchiefs, then produced some binding cloths from her bag. "Might I ask the two of you to help me?" she inquired of the nervous spectators. She pulled them both in, giving Gauchwin a handkerchief to wrap around Jinchi's skin. He might have been a man of near celestial beauty, and he might not have been lacking an important part that most men possessed, but nonetheless, Jinchi's torso was reasonably well muscled. He must have thought he would be cold wearing only his undergarments, for he had left his trousers on. Mau, who had thought the room quite warm enough, realized maybe she hadn't been very generous with him and added some coals to the brazier. Gauchwin wrapped the handkerchiefs around Jinchi, Sweden held them down, and Mau secured them in place with the cloths. When they were finished, Jinchi had acquired a rather portly silhouette. The slightly oversized clothes fit just right now. Mau had given Jinchi a not quite average body type, and the last traces of his perfume would soon be overcome by the odor on the clothes. Jinxi's face, the only thing that was obviously and unmistakably still his own, looked very strange floating there above his new body. All right, let's move on to the next thing then. Mama got out the batch of makeup she'd prepared the night before. It was slightly darker than Jinxi's skin tone. She began applying it delicately with her fingers. Yeesh, she thought. I am literally close enough to touch him, and he's still outrageously beautiful. Not only did he have no facial hair, he seemed to have no body hair of any kind. Once she'd done a thorough application of foundation, a mischievous thought came to her. For after all, when would she ever have a chance again? When would there ever come another opportunity to indulge her curiosity about exactly how lovely Jinxi would be if he were to be made up like a girl? Mama took a shell containing red pigment from among her implements. She dipped her pinky in and brushed some carefully onto Jinxi's lips. Then Mama was silent. Gauchwin and Sweden, looking on, were likewise speechless. Each of them looked first uncomfortable, then deeply conflicted. Then they all looked at each other and nodded. What's going on?" Jinxi asked, but no one answered. Their minds were too full of something much bigger. They were clearly all thinking the same thing. It was a blessing that only the three of them were present at this moment. If there had been anyone else, be it male or female, it would have been a tragedy. There were some things which, no matter how transcendent, the world was not meant to see. It was fearsome to realize that with just a dash of lip color, Jinxi might possess the power to bring low at least a couple of small villages. "It's nothing, sir," Mama said, taking the handkerchief Sweden offered her and rubbed it along Jinxi's lips hard enough to make sure she got everything off. "Ow, that's uncomfortable. What in the world was that about?" "As I said, sir, it's nothing." "Nothing at all, I assure you," Sweden added. "Not a thing, sir," Gauchwin said. Jinxi was skeptical about this sudden show of concord between the three of them, but he asked no further questions. Mama put the momentary distraction out of her mind and got back to work. The next step called for slightly darker coloring. She smeared some of the pigment on his face, creating bags under his eyes. While she was at it, she went ahead and tried a mole on each cheek. His gracefully arching eyebrows she thickened bit by bit, working carefully on one side and then the other. There were ways to alter the contours of the face, but at close proximity it would be obvious that it was makeup, so Mama decided to forego that step. On a woman, a bit of makeup might go unquestioned, but on a man's face it would arouse suspicion. Instead, she stuffed cotton into Jinxi's cheeks to change his profile. Gauchwin and Sweden looked on, surprised she would go that far, but she wasn't done yet. She daubed the remaining pigment here and there to complete the effect. For example, a bit of the stuff under his nails made him look positively filthy. Can't have his hands looking too pretty, she thought. Jinxi's hands, like his torso, were noticeably masculine. Mama had always taken him for someone who had never lifted anything heavier than a pair of chopsticks or a writing brush, but his palms had detectable calluses on them. He implied he had been training with a sword or perhaps a fighting staff, although she'd never seen him practicing. They weren't skills a eunuch would normally need. She couldn't muster the curiosity, though, to wonder about something so trivial as why Jinxi might have been trained in the fighting arts. Instead, she continued to systematically dirty his hands, turning them into those of an ordinary town person. "Are you quite finished?" Jinxi asked when Mama started packing up her cosmetics and tools, wiping some sweat from her brow. The gorgeous eunuch had vanished, replaced by an ungainly urban dweller who looked none too healthy. His face retained its appealing symmetry, but his protruding belly, the spots on his hands, and the dark bags under his eyes bespoke a less than sanitary lifestyle. The fact that he still looked like someone who could have got himself cast as a ladies' man in some stage play showed how much trouble his natural beauty was apt to cause. "Gracious, is that really my young master?" Sweden said. "Don't call me that." Sweden had seen the entire process from start to finish, and even she was surprised by the transformation. Now Jinxi could have moved unrecognized almost anywhere in the palace, unrecognized by his looks at least. Mama removed a bamboo cylinder from her pouch. She pulled the stopper, poured some of the contents into a cup, and handed it to Jinxi. He eyed it dubiously and frowned. The characteristic nose-prickling odor, Mama suspected. It was a combination of a number of different stimulants, and honestly speaking, the flavor could hardly be called appetizing. "What exactly is this?" "A special draft of my own devising. Drink slowly so it gets on your lips, and then swallow. It should cause swelling of the lips and throat, thereby changing your voice. Oh, you may want to take the cotton out of your mouth first." Jinxi could look and even smell different, but certain people would know him instantly if they heard that honeyed voice. If Mama was going to do something, she was going to do it right. "It's quite bitter," Mama added, "but don't worry, it isn't poisonous." A collective stunned silence greeted her. Mau Mau ignored it and resumed industriously cleaning up her workspace. She'd gotten permission to take the rest of the day off. For the first time in a while, she would be able to go back to the pleasure quarter, and above all, to do a little of the mixing and concocting she loved so much. The thought made her unusually cheery, but her parade was swiftly rained on. "Xiaomao, you said you'd be going home today, yes?" "Indeed, sir. I intend to leave presently," she said. Gashwin greeted this with a smile, as if to say that was perfect. It was an unusual expression from the reticent aide. "In that case, you'll be going the same way as Master Jinshi," he said. Ugh, Mama thought immediately. Her saving grace was that she didn't give voice to her disgust, but it was probably written all over her face. Gashwin snuck a glance at Jinshi, who looked just as shocked as Mau Mau. His mouth hung slightly agape. "You went to all the trouble of changing your appearance, sir. It would undermine the effect if you traveled with the same attendant you always do." "Goodness, I hadn't thought of that," Sweden said with an exaggerated nod that suggested the two of them had very much thought of it ahead of time. "Do you see what I mean, master?" Gashwin said. He looked uncommonly eager about this, pleased to be foisting Jinshi off on someone else for once, most likely. "I do. Yes, that would be helpful." Suddenly, Jinshi was on board too. "Now this won't do," Mama thought. "I'm exceedingly sorry," she said, "but I'm afraid that even in my company, Master Jinshi would have quite the same problem." It was true that, with his new, less remarkable appearance, it would be suiting for Jinshi to have a plain attendant such as Mau Mau, but it was already well known in some quarters that she was his personal maid. It would be best if they didn't travel together, against the slightest chance of them being recognized. Ah, but that crafty old lady-in-waiting Sweden! She greeted and dismissed this idea with a smile. She came over holding a lacquered box, from which she produced a pair of eyebrow tweezers and an ornamental hair stick. "Then I believe a disguise of your own is called for, Xiaomao," she said, and her smiling eyes contained a sharp edge that prevented Mau Mau from objecting further. That nagging premonition, though, got worse and worse. Chapter 7. A Jaunt Around Town. They would take a carriage from Jinshi's rooms to the gate of the outer court. Mau Mau's dramatic and successful transformation of her master was a double-edged sword. A man who looked like Jinshi now did bumbling around the palace was going to attract suspicion. Even the lowliest of maids and manservants were supplied with halfway decent clothing here. It might have seemed obvious to simply put on more refined clothing for the journey out, but considering Jinshi's stomach was artificially stuffed, a change of clothes later would have been tricky. This was a source of irritation to Mau Mau, who wanted everything to be perfect and was rather incensed at Jinshi's failure to understand his own beauty. They disembarked the carriage in a quiet spot, and almost immediately Mau Mau began lobbing critiques at Jinshi. "Master Jinshi, your posture is much too good. Slouch a little." At the moment, Jinshi stood as straight as if there were a string attached to his head to the heavens. "Well, speak for yourself," he grumbled. "A little heavy on the formalities, aren't we? And don't use my name. It defeats the point." His tone was rough, just like the man he now ostensibly was. Mau Mau privately admitted that he was right, but in that case, what should she call him? She narrowed her eyes and stared closely at Jinshi. Though she hadn't meant to, it made her look as though she were studying a moth that had fluttered up to a lantern. Jinshi's expression shifted to something difficult to describe. "What shall I call you then, sir?" Mau Mau asked finally. "Good question," Jinshi said, stroking his chin. He hummed for a moment, then said, "Call me Jinka." Jinka, Mau Mau thought. It wasn't particularly odd, and she was happy to use it, but the deliberate choice of the character Ka, which meant flower, was somewhat surprising in a man's name. But then again, Jinshi wasn't the most masculine name in the world either. Mau Mau briefly regretted that she hadn't simply disguised Jinshi as a woman, but then she remembered that dab of rouge and thought better of it. She shook her head. Jinshi must never appear in women's clothing, lest the very world tear itself apart. "Very well, then, Master Jinka." Mau Mau started, but she caught Jinshi glaring at her. Ah, yes, the formality. "Jinka, then. No honorifics, no deference." Mau Mau found the ornate mode of polite speech employed at the palace tricky to navigate, but in her mind, completely casual language was even harder. And what was that gleam in Jinshi's eyes? She'd worked so hard to make him appear sickly. He would bring the illusion crashing down if he looked too pleased. "Excellent, my lady," he said, his tone somewhat facetious. "Huh?" Mau Mau gaped at him, and Jinshi grinned broadly. "I should think this manner of speech the most suited considering our respective appearances," he said, looking Mau Mau up and down. Mau Mau's own disguise had been arranged by Sweden, who had dressed her in hand-me-downs from her own daughter. There was a whiff of camphor about them, but the make and material were excellent, and the design thoughtful, so they didn't look out of vogue. Her hair had been carefully gathered up and secured with a hair stick. She did indeed present the image of an affluent young lady. Now Mama pursed her lips and trotted off. Let's get this over with. Yes, ma'am. Mama was profoundly uncomfortable with this reversal of their accustomed roles, but Jinchi looked like he was having the time of his life. Jinchi's destination was a restaurant just outside the pleasure district. Apparently he had a meeting with some sort of acquaintance there, but Mama didn't press for details. Not asking too many questions, she felt, was frequently a wise way to get by in the world. Still, she couldn't help feeling somewhat used by Jinchi and Gaoxuan. Maybe I should act a little more oblivious, she thought as she walked down the street. This road was home to a market bustling with merchants hawking their wares. Leafy green vegetables were still few and far between at this time of year, but there were plenty of fat daikon. Mama had been given a bit of pocket change. She was just thinking that maybe she would have someone wring a chicken's neck for her and boil it with some daikon when someone grabbed her by the collar. "What is it?" she asked. Jinchi was looking down at her with a most distressing grin on his face. "You're going to go shopping?" he said. "I saw something I want. I was just going to go get it." "Looking like that?" She took his point. A woman who was well off enough to have an attendant with her would never dirty her hands purchasing her own produce, let alone having a chicken slaughtered. Mama gazed longingly at the vegetables. But I wanted to make it for my old man, she thought. Pops was both a doctor and an apothecary par excellence, but he had one glaring flaw, a total inability to weigh profit and loss. Thus, though apothecary's work should have kept him eating luxurious foods for the rest of his life, he instead lived in a shack that looked like it could fall down in a stiff breeze. Of course, if he ever seemed like he was really going to starve for want of food, the old madam would probably have funneled it into him. Mama resumed walking, pouting now. Jinchi was still trying to pretend to be her manservant, but he had a long stride, and before she knew it, he was in front of her. Mama had to pick up her pace to keep up with him. She thought, he's got a long way to go. Jinchi's eyes were still sparkling. He at least managed not to gawk, but he was obviously enjoying where he was and what he was doing. To a pampered aristocrat like him, a common market must have been a novel sight. Mama overtook Jinchi and glared at him. He seemed to realize he'd been careless and looked chastened for a moment, but then he set off walking again as if nothing had happened. At least he stayed behind Mama this time. Mama said nothing aloud, but she thought to herself, when I get home, I've got to see how the field is doing. She crooked her fingers, counting as she imagined what herbs she might find there. I wonder if the mugwort has come in yet, and how terrific would it be if the butterbur were ready to pick. Still, she said nothing aloud. She was just imagining herself frying the butterbur with some meat and miso when she realized Jinchi was looming just beside her. "What is it, sir?" Mama said, glaring at Jinchi and inadvertently reverting to her usual deference. Jinchi was clearly itching to say something. "Why so quiet?" he asked, likewise adopting the directness to which he was usually entitled. Why wasn't she saying anything? Well, there could really be just one reason, couldn't there? Because I don't have anything to say? She had only spoken the truth, but apparently that was a mistake. Jinchi bit his lip and an inscrutable expression crossed his face. Mama wasn't worried that he might burst into tears. He wasn't a little boy, but he still managed to look thoroughly pathetic. He was the one who said I should act more brusque with him, Mama thought. She wasn't normally the type to initiate a conversation anyway, so when she didn't have anything in particular to talk about, and when no one was asking her any specific questions, she tended to keep her peace. Why this was such a shock to this man mystified her. She was just scratching the back of her neck nervously, wondering what to do, when a meat skewer stall came into view. She broke into a brisk trot and ordered 2 skewers from the man behind the counter. Just looking at the perfectly crisped chicken meat made her mouth water. "Try it," she said, passing one of the skewers to Jinchi. He slowly took it, looking at it as if he had never seen one before. "Quick, before it gets cold." Mama guided them to a small side street just off the main road. She brushed some dust off a wooden crate and sat down on top of it. When she bit into the grilled meat, the juices exploded in her mouth and the fragrant chicken skin gave an audible snap. "God, that's good." Mama leaned forward to keep the juices from running onto her clothes. Jinchi wasn't eating, but just watching her. "Not going to have yours? As you can see, it isn't poisoned." "No, that's not what I'm worried about," Jinchi said, tapping his cheek. Ah, now she remembered. She had stuffed cotton into his mouth to help give him a different profile. Mama took out a square of paper and passed it to him. He spat out the cotton balls and tossed them into a nearby wastebasket. A versatile paper square like that was one that was very valuable, just another of Sweden's thoughtful touches along with the clothes. I didn't think to bring any replacement cotton, Mama thought. This rubbed her perfectionistic streak the wrong way, but she doubted it was something most people would actually notice. Still inspecting the skewer with a certain amount of wonder, Jinshi brought it to his mouth. It must have been a little warm for him because he blew on it forcefully before chewing and swallowing. "What do you think, sir?" "Damn sight better than what they served at the bivouac. Good and salty," Jinshi said, wiping the juice off his lips with his fingers. Mama took a handkerchief out of her pocket and handed it to him, but she was thinking, bivouac? Eunuchs, as far as she knew, didn't normally serve in the military, so she wasn't sure what to make of this. Maybe a person like Jinshi would be roughing it out in the wilderness if a war started or something, but under normal circumstances, what would lead to a eunuch spending his nights in the field? As she entertained the question, Mama studied Jinshi's face. A bit of the makeup had come off around his mouth, but it wasn't enough to worry about. She looked away. "All right, whatever our business is here, let's get it over with," she thought. She finished the last of the meat on her skewer and stood up from the crate. She was determined to go back and buy that daikon and chicken once she ditched Jinshi. Despite her haste, Jinshi insisted on doing everything with slow, elegant movements, much to Mama's annoyance. "Are you quite sure you're going to be in time for your meeting, Jinka?" she asked pointedly, using his fake name. "I think we got a few minutes yet." "Wouldn't it be best to arrive early? It's bad manners to make someone wait for you." Now it was Jinshi who looked annoyed. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you were trying to get rid of me." "Would you?" Mama said innocently, but of course Jinshi had hit the nail on the head. He looked a bit sullen, but didn't complain further. Instead, he changed the subject. "I can't imagine life in the palace is that bad. Surely it must be better than here in the pleasure district." Mamo had to admit it wasn't terrible, particularly now that she was serving there of her own volition. She had a small but clean room and an offer to move to other quarters. She had been quite lucky, she felt, but the lifestyle wasn't the only reason she might have wanted to go back to the pleasure district. "I'm worried whether my old man is taking proper care of himself," she said. Jinshi's mouth practically hung open. "What?" Mamo asked. "It's nothing. I just never knew you were interested in anything besides drugs and poisons." Mama replied with a glare. "Rude bastard. My adoptive father is my teacher in matters of medicine, so I certainly hope he'll continue to live a good long time." Then she turned her back decisively on Jinshi and started walking. Yes, she knew for sure now. She wanted to get this over with. Jinshi, looking slightly frazzled, came up alongside her. "This father of yours, I gather he's indeed a talented apothecary." After a moment, Mao answered hesitantly. "He is." She didn't think it was fair of Jinshi leveraging talk of her father like this. "Apparently he studied in the West when he was a young man." Thus he was familiar not only with her own region's traditional medicine, but with Western medical techniques as well. She occasionally saw him taking notes in a foreign language, and once in a while he would use words that sounded quite unusual to her. It made her think he must have been quite some time in that foreign land. "Really? He did that?" Jinshi asked. "He must have been something special then. I believe people are only sent on those studies by endorsement from the government." His transparent amazement only confirmed for Mao that her father was an exceptional person. "Yes, he is rather incredible. The old proverb holds that heaven doesn't give two gifts to one man, but I guess there are exceptions to the rule." The excitement was creeping into her voice now, and she was growing more voluble than usual. "He must have been quite a man indeed." Jinshi, in contrast, looked more subdued than before. Perhaps she'd said too much, and something in her flood of words had upset him. He was the one who insisted I talk, she thought. She wished he would make up his blasted mind. Jinshi, desperate to look at anything but Mao, let his gaze wander among the shops that lined the streets. The restaurants and food stalls had given way to places selling textiles and accessories. Men flitted from one to the next, picking presents to please their nighttime butterflies. "And what is such a distinguished person doing running a druggist's shop in a nameless corner of the pleasure district?" There was a thorn hidden in Jinshi's words. Heaven gave him many gifts, but luck was not one of them. And as much as he was given, something was also taken from him, something important. Ill fortune, that was Loman's one great flaw, if he had one. His study in the West had proven sufficient pretext for the former emperor's mother, that is to say, the former empress dowager, to have him made a eunuch. Jinshi watched Mao silently. Just as she was starting to fear that another of her red light district jokes had fallen flat, he said, "You're telling me that the father who adopted you is a eunuch?" "Yes, sir," Mama said, wondering if she hadn't mentioned it before. Jinshi started mumbling, "Eunuch, apothecary, doctor." Amidst this talking and mumbling, they reached their destination. Mama looked at the note Gauchwin had given her. "I believe that's it, sir," she said, pointing to a place just at the border of the pleasure district. The upper floor was an inn and the lower a restaurant, a fairly standard arrangement. "Yes, I think you're right, but we still have a few minutes," Jinshi said, looking around. "Ah, now I get it," Mama thought, narrowing her eyes. She understood why Jinshi had gone to all the trouble of disguising himself and marching around the town market. Yes, she saw it all now. Mama let out a long breath. I fear that traipsing around too much will cause your makeup to come off. Besides, the person you're meeting might be inside already. Better to go have a look than to risk making them wait, isn't it? Jinshi finally seemed to take the hint. I shall part ways with you here then, sir. What, here? Yes, you took the trouble of disguising yourself. It would spoil everything if I walked in with you. Mama gave a polite nod of the head and started back toward the market. As she went, she glanced over her shoulder to see Jinshi entering the restaurant. I guess even eunuchs need a day off now and then, she thought. She crossed her arms and nodded, and then she started thinking again. If he was going to come all the way out here, he might as well just go into the pleasure district proper, for she knew what a kind of restaurant it was that Jinshi had just gone into. They served the waitresses along with the food. Well, I hope he has a good night, she thought a touch caustically, staring at the restaurant with a freezing look in her eye.